Chapter 30, Year 889 PXF, Late Autumn. Thorn heard Jenkins' voice rattle in the darkness as it swallowed him. "Little Edgeborn, all alone in the dark, with no gun guarding over him." A bony fist slammed into Thorn's side with enough force to knock him against the bars of the cages lining the hallway with a loud clang. As he slid to the floor, he heard the cell's occupants scurry away, along with the sound of a water trough being upended and its contents spilling across the floor as they fled. Thorn was unable to see in the inky blackness. While he could easily create light magically, he knew even the simplest spell within Serena's lair would be like a fly disturbing a spider's web, alerting her to his presence. It was also apparent that Jenkins could see perfectly through the darkness. Thorn was only lightly armed, as he had stripped himself of all but the most mundane of arcane items to avoid Serena's sight, leaving him only his enchanted hammer and the returning stone. But luckily, not all an artificer's tricks were magical. Thorn leaped to his feet and ran up the hall, pulling his nearly opaque artificer's goggles over his eyes. Reaching a gloved hand into a small pouch at his waist, he scooped out a handful of metallic pellets and threw them in a wide arc toward the cell whose bars he had impacted. As they tinked against the metal bars and across the floor, when they came in contact with the spilled water, they ignited in strobes of blinding white flame. Jenkins roared in pain at the flashing light cutting through the darkness, and Thorn got his first look at what he had become through his shaded goggles. Jenkins looked as though his skeleton had been stretched to twice its length without the consent of the surrounding flesh. Huge open rents marred his skin where it hadn't fallen away entirely. Sinew tight as bowstrings pulled oddly at bloated limbs hugely swollen with muscle as he tried to shield his eyes and staggered backward. The restrained movements of his twisted form, combined with the strobing flashes from the burning metal, made Jenkins look like a marionette with hopelessly tangled strings. "I'll kill you, you hedge-born shite!" Jenkins spat, still covering his eyes with one distorted hand while swinging wildly with the other. Thorn knew he didn't have long, but seeing Jenkins' sorry state, he almost hated to use the other item he had brought. His resolve began to falter as he pulled the sloshing bladder out of its pouch, feeling the weight in his hand. "Hello? Is someone there? Help me, please!" A voice pleaded from through the closed doors behind Jenkins. The voice was unmistakable. Every second he had spent with Riken all those years ago flashed before Thorn's eyes, and his hand moved of its own volition. The bladder burst on Jenkins' chest with an evil hiss, the acid within finding every open wound and seeping deep into the exposed tissues. The rancor of Jenkins' rage transformed into pleading cries of anguish. The acid, which could strip 100 years of rust off a mining mill in minutes, found little of notable resistance in Jenkins' body. Liquefied flesh began to pour out of Jenkins' every orifice as acrid smoke and the sickly sweet aroma of burnt sugar and talc filled the corridor. The monstrosity that had been Jenkins fell to the floor, spasming in a puddle of his liquefied remains. The strobing flashes of the burning metal died out, and Thorn lifted his goggles. He stood still for a moment, listening to the darkness for signs of other threats. It felt like the world was holding its breath as Thorn struck a flame with his tinder and recovered his lantern. He walked forward like he was in a dream, the rest of the world disappearing around him, unbelieving of what possibly lay ahead. Thorn lifted the lantern and looked through the small barred window high in the door. It was as though he had been hit by lightning. Features he never thought he would see again in this life looked up at him, pulling every bit of air out of his lungs. Storm-cloud eyes and raven-dark hair burned away every bit of darkness and gloom that surrounded him. "Riken." The name escaped Thorn's lips before he could stop them. The young man in the cell strained against manacles that chained him to the wall, a pleading look on his face. Osmond had said he would be 27 years old, but the person before Thorn was the twin of Riken as he last remembered him at the spring when they were celebrating Talon's 17th birthday, and Riken was barely 19. A creeping unease began to fill Thorn. Was this person another of Serena's deceptions? Thorn looked closer at the prisoner and saw his ears' subtle elven sculpted shape, revealing an Uldani heritage. That was not something Serena would have conjured in an illusion had she known her prisoner's true identity. All caution thrown to the wind, a loud arcane knock echoed through the dungeon as the wooden door before him burst its locks and swung open. "There are symbols on the walls," the reborn twin of his lost love said. Thorn quickly looked and saw the cold black etchings on the stonework. Naz had always said he was better at breaking runes than making them, and speed was now the critical factor. Thorn brought up his small hammer and activated the enchantment, giving it the power of a maul. He swung it at the connection between the first rune and the second, shattering the etchings and stone along with it. He watched as the now unbalanced magic of the first two runes unraveled and overloaded the rest. "We need to get you out of here," Thorn said as he used 2 more arcane knocks to break the locks on the manacles. Thorn moved to the door, shining the shrouded lantern down the hallway to see if it was still empty. "You called me Riken. My mother always told me that was a secret name I should never tell anyone. Only one person knows that name. The Falcon Knight, who exists only in my dreams," the prisoner said, suspicion marring his expression. Thorn crossed back to where his first and only love stood. "I may not seem it, but I am your Falcon Knight, and I promised the gods themselves that I would find you. Always." "Always," Riken echoed back to Thorn, hand going to his lips as though he was surprised that he had said it. "You are right, though. We should call you Quentin. That's your name, right? We can't let anyone discover your other name," Thorn said as he grabbed Quentin's wrist and pulled him through the door. They were halfway up the hallway when the dim light of his lantern revealed a shadowy figure as it turned the corner out of the makeshift laboratory and began limping down the hallway of cells toward them. "Well, now what do we have here?" echoed Serena's voice, clenched in anger. "A little bird has come to steal my worm." With a wave of her hand, all the torches in the dungeon burst to life, revealing her true face. Thorn couldn't hold back the gasp when he saw the ruined visage of his once beautiful cousin. Her cascading curls now fell as dead hangs of lank graying straw. A smile that had lit up rooms was but a cruel slash filled with sharpened shark's teeth. Most disturbing was her lidless left eye that eclipsed the whole side of her face like an overripe pumpkin of the drowned moon, rife with the veins of spreading rot. The ruptured socket and raw burn-scarred skin surrounding the obscenity of her eye barely held in its bulbous weight. The malevolent eye scanned the room of its own accord, independent of her right eye, which stayed locked on Thorn and Quentin. "Serena, you don't have to," Thorn began, but his words evaporated as a long amphibious-like tongue stretched out of Serena's mouth to lick and moisten the vulgarity of her swollen eye. "You have no right to say what I have to do," Serena snapped as her tongue slipped back into her mouth. "What I've already done, what I've sacrificed and endured, is beyond anything you can comprehend, boy." Thorn now saw the dripping, ragged stump of Serena's right arm and fully noted the odd twist of her gait. It was as though her hips had been broken repeatedly at some point in the past and poorly set to heal. Her left arm lifted, and she pointed a single finger at Thorn and began to chant. Her swollen eye spun from its roving to lock on its target, and began to glow with an otherworldly green light from the depths of its murky orb. Even her distance from him could not dull the signature of the powerful magic Thorn felt coalescing around Serena. Thorn scrambled backward, pushing Quentin in front of him, trying to reach the cover of Quentin's cell. Thorn kept his eyes on Serena, only daring to glance at their destination as they ran, knowing they would never make it in time. The skin around her bulging eye stretched and distended like something beneath was trying to push through. Serena's chant slowed and became labored screams as she worked to complete the spell. For a moment, Thorn thought Serena had sprouted wings from her ears as the giant mist owl slammed into the back of her head and tumbled talons over beak through the air down the hallway towards them. The somersaulting mass of gray feathers transformed into arms, legs, and a set of tiny velvet antlers as Osmond landed in a three-point stance between Thorn and Serena, bone dagger drawn, just as the spell she was casting finished.